You think you know someone after 22 years. You think you've seen every part of them, their smile when they wake up, the way they take their coffee, the rhythm of their breathing as they sleep. You think that love means knowing. But I learned that even after decades, someone can still be a stranger in your own home. My name is Claire, and for 22 years, I thought I was living the kind of love people spend their lives searching for. Mark and I met in college, two awkward souls who clicked from the first moment. He had this quiet confidence, the kind that made you feel safe just standing next to him. I was 21, full of dreams, and he was the man who made all of them seem possible. We got married 3 years later in a small church surrounded by friends, family, and the kind of laughter that fills a lifetime. The early years were beautiful. We were both building our careers, me as a teacher, him in finance. We'd come home late, tired, but somehow always found time to cook together. He'd tell me about the office. I'd tell him stories about my students. On weekends, we'd drive out to the coast, take pictures of sunsets, and make promises that felt like they'd last forever. We were partners in everything, or so I thought. When you live with someone that long, you start building a rhythm. You know what mornings sound like together. You know the exact way they say your name when they're happy or when they're hiding something. Looking back, I can't believe I missed the changes when they started. But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in quietly, disguised as routine. It started small. Late nights at the office. More business trips than usual. I didn't think much of it. Mark had always been ambitious. But then he started guarding his phone, turning it face down, silencing notification. Once, I reached for it to check the time, and he snatched it out of my hand so fast it startled me. He laughed it off, said he was reading a confidential email, but something inside me felt off. For months, I tried to ignore it. You tell yourself you're overreacting. You make excuses because the truth feels too heavy to carry. I blamed stress, work, middle age. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I could feel it like a pulse beneath the surface of our life together. One night, he came home smelling like perfume. Not my perfume. It was floral and sharp, the kind of scent that clings to skin. When I asked about it, he smiled and said one of the secretaries at work had hugged him after a meeting because she got promoted. I laughed. He laughed, and I convinced myself that was normal. Because after 22 years, why would I doubt the man I built my life around? The real unraveling began on an ordinary Thursday. He said he had a late dinner meeting. I nodded, kissed his cheek, and told him to drive safe. But an hour later, I realized he'd left his laptop at home. Normally, he would have called me right away. I texted him. No reply. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed his laptop and turned it on. The password hadn't changed. That should have comforted me, but it didn't. I opened his email, half expecting to find nothing. But buried under the work threads and newsletters, there was a folder labeled Receipts. I clicked it open and found hotel confirmations. Not one, several, different dates. Same hotel, same city, each time he'd told me he was on a business trip. My hands shook as I scrolled through them. Each booking had 2 guests listed. The other name was R. Mitchell. I didn't know who she was, but the name burned into my mind like fire. I could feel my heart breaking in real time, but I wasn't ready to believe it yet. I needed proof. So I waited. That night, when he came home, he smelled like rain and whiskey. He kissed my forehead and told me the meeting went well. I smiled, pretending I didn't already know. I asked him how the hotel was, the one he stayed at last week. He froze just for a second, then laughed. Said he didn't stay anywhere, that he drove home that night. I stared at him, searching his face for something real. There was nothing but a mask of ease. I didn't confront him then. Instead, I planned. Over the next few weeks, I watched him more closely than ever. I memorized his patterns, the way he'd leave his phone charging in the kitchen while he showered, the way he'd delete his messages before dinner. I started writing everything down, dates, times, places, like a detective in my own life. And then came the night that changed everything. It was a Saturday. I had pretended to go visit my sister for the weekend. Instead, I waited in my car down the street from our house. Around 7, Mark left, dressed too nicely for a casual dinner. I followed him. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. He drove across town to a small restaurant, one we used to love. I watched as he parked, got out, and greeted a woman who was waiting by the entrance. She was younger, maybe mid-30s, long blonde hair, wearing a red coat. He hugged her, the kind of hug you don't give a coworker. I wanted to scream, to run up and demand an explanation, but I didn't. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching my husband of 22 years pull out a chair for another woman, pour her wine, laugh in the same way he used to laugh with me. Every gesture was a dagger. Every smile was another wound. I stayed there for an hour until the pain became unbearable. Then I drove home in silence. He came back around midnight. I pretended to be asleep. The next morning, he brought me coffee in bed, told me he missed me last night. I stared at him, wondering how someone could lie so easily while looking into the eyes of the person they vowed to love forever. 2 days later, I confronted him. I waited until after dinner, when the dishes were done, when the quiet of the house made every word echo. I told him I knew, about the hotel rooms, about the woman, about the nights he said he was working late. He didn't deny it, not immediately. He just sat there, staring at the table, his hands trembling slightly. Then he said it wasn't what I thought, that it had only been a few months, that he'd been lonely, that I'd been distant, that somehow this was my fault too. I wanted to believe it was a moment of weakness, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, a choice, and maybe it had been going on longer than I ever imagined. The days that followed were a blur. I barely ate. I barely slept. I kept replaying our entire marriage, trying to find the moment where the truth had slipped away. Every anniversary, every family vacation, every night spent laughing in our kitchen. It all felt like a lie now. People talk about heartbreak like it's emotional, but it's physical too. It's an ache that sits in your chest, heavy and relentless. I thought I needed answers, so I found her, the woman. Her name was Rachel. I discovered her through a mutual friend on social media. She didn't even know I existed. She thought Mark was divorced, that he lived alone, that he was starting over. She looked shocked when I messaged her. She apologized, said she never would have been with him if she'd known. I believed her. That night, I confronted him one last time. He confessed everything. It had started 2 years ago. 2 years of lies, of sneaking around, of double lives. He said he didn't mean to hurt me, that he'd fallen in love with her. I remember sitting there, numb, thinking about how 2 years earlier we'd renewed our vows in front of all our friends. He'd stood there, looking into my eyes, and promised forever again, knowing full well he'd already broken it. I asked him to leave. He cried, begged, said we could fix it. But something in me had died. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I just told him quietly that love doesn't survive deceit. He packed a bag and walked out. I thought I'd feel relief, but I didn't. I felt empty. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. I'd built my identity around being his wife, his partner, his confidant. Without that, I didn't know who I was. I'd wake up reaching for him out of habit. I'd make 2 cups of coffee before remembering there was no one else. The house felt too big, too quiet. Every corner held a ghost. But somewhere in that silence, something shifted. I realized that maybe this was my chance to rediscover myself. I started therapy. I started journaling. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with. I began walking in the mornings again, feeling the world move without him. The pain didn't vanish, but it changed. It became a kind of fuel, a reminder that I had survived the worst night of my life. Months passed. The divorce was finalized quietly. He moved in with Rachel. I didn't follow their lives. I didn't need to. I was too busy building mine. I traveled for the first time in years, just me and a small suitcase. I laughed again. I painted the kitchen the color I'd always wanted, bright and warm. Every change was a small act of taking my life back. One afternoon, about a year after everything, I ran into Mark at the grocery store. He looked older, tired. We made small talk, polite, distant. He said he hoped I was doing okay. I told him I was more than okay, and for the first time, I meant it. As I walked away, I realized I didn't hate him anymore. The anger had faded. In its place was something else. Acceptance. Betrayal doesn't just break you. It transforms you. It forces you to look at yourself, at your strength, at what you're capable of surviving. I lost the man I thought I knew, but I found the woman I had forgotten I was. I learned that love doesn't always mean forever. Sometimes it's just a lesson dressed as a dream. If you've ever been betrayed, I want you to know something. It's not your fault. The lies they told say more about who they are than who you are. You will hurt. You will break, but you will heal. And when you do, you'll see that losing them wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 22 years of lies ended in one night of truth. And that truth set me free. I used to think that my marriage was my greatest accomplishment. Now I know my greatest accomplishment was walking away from it with my heart still beating. So this is not a story of betrayal. It's a story of rebirth, of finding peace after the storm, of learning that sometimes the person you need to trust most is yourself. Because sometimes the moment you catch someone cheating isn't the moment your world ends. It's the moment you finally begin to live.